Okay, so welcome to our CRSC Kaleidoscope lecture. My name is Robin Kingsborough. I'm the past president of the CRSC, and I'd like to welcome you today by first stating our land acknowledgement. The CRSC's activities related to sharing color knowledge take place across Canada, understood as part of Turtle Island, the ancestral homelands of over 630 First Nation communities, representing more than 50 Indigenous nations and languages. We work to respect, affirm, and support where necessary the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across these lands and waters. Our commitment to honoring the knowledge, ways of knowing, and wisdom of Turtle Island's Indigenous peoples aims to contribute to the decolonizing work required today for moving towards a just society. So welcome. The CRSC, we are a nonprofit organization for color research focused on fostering a cross-disciplinary sharing of color knowledge. We seek to develop and support a national cross-disciplinary network of artists, designers, scholars, and practitioners with an interest in engagement with color and to encourage discourse between the art, sciences, industry related to color research and color knowledge. We're the Canadian member of the AIC, International Color Organization. I'm very happy to welcome Harald Arnkil today to give us his talk on color in contemporary art. I've known Harald online over the last few years. We're both members of the Color Literacy Project, and I have learned a lot from Harald, and he's been a great supporter and contributor to our website, and just his kind of depth of knowledge and expertise in color is phenomenal, and he's going to share some of that today. He's a Finnish artist, writer, and color researcher, and founder and former president of the Finnish Color Association. He studied art and design in England in the 1970s before returning to his country of birth to study at the Finnish Academy of Fine Art, where he graduated from painting in 1979. Harald's art has been exhibited in both Finland and abroad, and his works are in many private and public collections. He taught art and color for over 30 years at the Aalto University School of Arts, Design, and Architecture, retiring from his position of senior university lecturer in 2019. He's published numerous articles and research papers on color and art, design and architecture, and has presented them in AIC conferences and other research venues. His textbook for artists, designers, and architects, called Colors in the Visual World, was published as an English language edition by Aalto University in 2013. And it's completely fantastic and really helpful for teaching color if you're a lecturer or if you want to learn about color. Harald's doctoral thesis, Exploring Color in Contemporary Art, was passed with distinction at Aalto University in June last year, and that's what Harald is going to be sharing with us today. So once again, very welcome and very happy to have you share your work. Thank you, Harald.
Thank you, Robin. Okay. Let's see if I can get this right the first time. Oh yeah, we were on the wrong. Put it to the beginning. There we go.
That looks good.
Good. I just collapsed this out of the way. Yeah. So as Robin said, my talk today is based on my doctoral research and my thesis, Exploring Color in Contemporary Art, Epistemic Boundaries and Artistic Practices. This talk is about contemporary art. Everything I say applies to so-called fine art, that is art made by professionals who consider making art their number one livelihood and who operate in the so-called art world, I guess, I suppose, as described by Arthur Danto. some of my findings may apply indirectly to design and architecture, but I have treated contemporary art as a phenomenon and a sphere of activity of its own. The main research questions of my thesis were: how do contemporary artists use color in their works and artistic actions? Or, in other words, what governs or guides their choice of colors? And secondly, what is the relation of color theory to contemporary art practice? My thesis is in 6 parts. To find answers to my, you see the sort of framework of my thesis book over there, the six parts and so on. And to find answers to my research questions, I did the following. I conducted 2-hour in-depth interviews of 9 artists from 5 countries for the purpose of testing my intuitions and pre-knowledge on the subject. I made a survey of recent color philosophy, that is the epistemology of color. Color philosophy is a kind of separate sub category of philosophy in general, quite a lively one. I explored philosophies of color in art. I guess you could call it also aesthetics. In the writings of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Michel Dufresne, Gilles Deleuze, Jean-François Lyotard, and Michel Henry. Very few philosophers have published texts of any length or depth on the subject of color in modern and contemporary art. And I chose these 5, who all happen to be French, because I found their texts the most interesting and the most relevant to my research. I made an overview of the color theories contained in recent pedagogical literature for artists. And finally, I conducted a survey of the works and approaches to color of roughly 200 contemporary artists. This was a kind of literature study, but also a media study, and based also on my notes and experience of numerous, endless, countless exhibitions and some biennales of art, of contemporary art. My main findings were that contemporary artists have abandoned color theory as a formal aesthetic informing their art and have replaced it with novel color strategies. The most popular printed and digital sources about color for artists are out of touch with how contemporary artists work with and relate to color. They are also ignorant of the findings of contemporary science concerning the perception and psychology of color. Now I'm talking about the most popular sources. There are, of course, sources that you can find information about, for example, color management. You can find information about some aspects of color and light and color science, color mixing, and the workings of the visual system. But this information either doesn't find its way to the most popular printed books on color for artists, or the information gets corrupted on the way so that it no longer holds. And none of these publications cite or mention texts on color by any philosophers of art of the modern and contemporary era. Contemporary art discourse and art criticism avoids color. I have given some hypotheses about these reasons behind this in my thesis. The phenomenologically informed texts on color in art by the 5 French philosophers in my thesis delve deep into the way contemporary artists think about and use color. Yet They are not discussed in the color literature for artists and have been almost completely ignored in contemporary art discourse. Knowledge about color, including the knowledge about using colorants and technology of color, is scattered in numerous epistemic spheres. One of my key arguments is that, contrary to what is often implied in artistic color theory literature, there is no single universally applicable color theory or first principles to which all color theories can be reduced, such as the idea that color is in its essence light, or that color phenomena can be explained by neural activity in the eye and brain. An important discovery in my research was that although color is customarily considered a single entity, it is spoken of with very different styles of language and with very different concepts and terminology within each of the spheres of knowledge. These differences do not only impact the kinds of knowledge and theories created within the spheres, but also contribute to the difficulty of transferring knowledge between color didactics, pedagogy, color science, artistic knowledge, color philosophy, and philosophy of art about color. Hence, my subtitle, Epistemic Boundaries. I focused on 4 of the most relevant spheres of knowledge in my thesis: artistic color theories, aesthetics and philosophy of color, color philosophy, and artistic knowledge, or the knowledge of the studios. And in my conclusions, compared how the first 3 have impacted the knowledge of the studios, and to some extent also vice versa. One of the defining features of contemporary and postmodern art is that it breaks, pushes against, or parodies mainstream formal aesthetics and the conventions of classical and modern art. Among them are the rules of universal harmony, balance, composition, and beauty, including those concerning color. The crisis of modernism was brought on by a growing disbelief in so-called grand narratives, the collapse of universal truths, which in turn was accelerated by the launching of the World Wide Web and Internet. In art, this collapse was further enabled by instant access at the press of a button on a computer or a smartphone to images, ideas, and whole archives of data produced by institutions and individuals. Furthermore, the globalization of the art market, the proliferation of biennials and triennials of contemporary art, together with the availability of cheap air travel, have afforded artists with access to uses of color they had never seen or imagined before. The ordering structure of place and time that characterizes a conventional approach to art history has imploded into a placeless and timeless singularity. This rupture in the aesthetics of visual art should come as no surprise to anyone who has followed the contemporary art scene during the last 40 or 50 years. Nevertheless, the writers of guidelines, rules, and theories about color for artists seem to be oblivious of this fact or ignore it for other reasons. Most of the authors of those rules and guidelines seem unaware of the innovative approach to color which contemporary artists have developed in place of the abandoned or defunct theories and what the contemporary art world now considers as outdated dogma. The scarcity of writing about color has gone hand in hand with the accession of critical theory in art education. In his article, When Form Has Become Attitude and Beyond, professor of modern and contemporary art theory, Thierry Dedeuve, observed how, quote, linguistic semiotics, anthropology, psychoanalysis, Marxism, feminism, structuralism, and post-structuralism, in short, theory, or so-called French theory, succeeded in displacing, sometimes replacing, studio practice while renewing the critical vocabulary of intellectual tools with which to approach the making and the appreciation of art, unquote. Whether one agrees or not with Thierry de Duve's view of the fate of art education, one thing is clear. Color did not fare well in the onrush into art schools of psychoanalysis, linguistics, semiotics, etc. But it need not have been so. When I began to search for art philosophical texts which would address color in contemporary art, it was in the French theory of the post-structuralists and phenomenologists Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Michel Dufresne, Gilles Deleuze, Jean-François Lyotard, and Michel Henry that I found the most relevant and interesting ideas. So how do artists in this postmodern condition use color in their works and artistic actions? And what is the relation of color theories to contemporary art praxis? Choosing a combination of colors or a color effect for an artwork involves, of necessity, choices of some kind, and often a strategy or a plan. If, as I suspected, artists have largely abandoned normative rules and axiomatic theories of color composition and harmony, what kinds of approaches have they replaced them with? To test my pre-knowledge on the subject and to get ideas for how to proceed, I interviewed 9 artists from 5 countries about their approach to color in their art. The artists in the order of interviewing were Kristi Kongi from Estonia, Jussi Guuman, Vesa-Pekka Rannikko, and Inka Kivale from Finland, Lois Swernoff, Natalie Miebach, and Douglas Pro from the United States, Ann-Veronica Janssens from Belgium, and David Batchelor from the United Kingdom. Many interesting insights emerged from those interviews. The main findings were that, first of all of the 9 interviewees regarded color theory distantly and warily, even suspiciously. 2, color harmony was either difficult to define for them, irrelevant, or something to be avoided or, quote, pushed against. 3, the modes of appearance of color, their glossiness, mattness, transparency, texture, spatial relation, etc., were as important as their hue or nuance, or in some cases even more so. The 4th, the interviewees emphasized the role of intuition instead of rules in their decisions about color. You can read a summary of the interviews, which they were over 400 pages of transcribed text, as far as I remember, but they're reduced to just about 40, I think 43 pages in my thesis. Very interesting conversations. To complement these findings, I made a literature and a media survey, including a study of roughly 200 contemporary artists' approaches to color. Instead of relying solely on what has been written about color in art and, by art historians and theorists, which is not much, by the way, my goal was to bring to the forefront the voices and the works of the artists. When I embarked on this part of my thesis, dealing with the praxis of color in contemporary art, I felt like most people probably feel about contemporary art today, lost in an ever-expanding rainforest of continuously emerging new species. But gradually, from my data emerged roughly 8 categories which were emblematic of a postmodern and contemporary approach to color in art. These categories are or were system-based color, randomized color, found color, conceptual color, political and societal color, colors of popular culture, kitsch, camp, and the banal, colors of new media and video, immersive and immaterial color. I emphasize in my thesis that there could be other categories as well. There could be much more, probably are much more. And because the field, the sphere, the world of contemporary art is an ever expanding, rapidly expanding field of activity, it's impossible to kind of capture them in any static framework or set of categories. And some of these, of course, overlap each other and so on. This was just an attempt for me to try and get a handle on this subject. If I were to pick one category or approach that represented best the break with the modern past in attitudes towards color, it would be a kind of anti-aesthetics achieved with various forms of randomizing the choice of colors, either by an aleatory system, ready-made charts, or by leaving the color choices to the artist's colleagues or to non-artist collaborators. This postmodern approach to color is epitomized in Robert Rauschenberg's statement about his attitude to color while still a student under Joseph Albers. Rauschenberg said, quote, "At that time, surplus paint fit my budget well. It was like 10 cents for a quart can downtown because nobody knew what color it was. I would just go and buy a whole mass of paint, and the only organization, choice, or discipline was that I had to use some of all of it and wouldn't buy any more paint until I'd used that up." One of my subjects of interest was and is the ineffability of color, color's irreducibility to words or other symbol systems. The 5 philosophers whose writings on color in art I present in my thesis have interesting thoughts about this subject. For Jean-François Lyotard, for example, the colors and gestures of painting represented a transgressive and libidinal power that can never be conflated to or contained within language. This view of color is present in the works of contemporary artists such as Jessica Stockholder, Katarina Grosse, and Hrafn-Hildur Arnardóttir, better known as Shoplifter, and the visceral and often disturbing works of the British artist Anish Kapoor. Let's now look at a selection of more contemporary approaches to color. I said that all my 9 interviewees regarded color theory distantly and even suspiciously. This does not mean that all contemporary artists have avoided using systematic approaches to color. They just regard them differently from previous generations. The Newtonian spectrum was the be-all and end-all for such modernists as the Swiss artist Richard Paul Lohse, and continues to provide a systematic framework for the immersive works of the American artist Sanford Wormfeld. In contrast to these, in Toba Auerbach's RGB color space atlas, we see a similar order of colors as in Lohse and Wormfeld, but here the treatment is more conceptual. The RGB color space is a contemporary tool for photomechanical and digital color management. Auerbach has turned it into sculptural objects with no conceivable utility. The Icelandic-Danish artist Ólafur Eliasson has created over 100 variations on the spectrum and the color circle in his series Color Experiment.
Navigating.
The Newtonian
job wasn't working out was a crushing blow. He felt that his best option was to go back.
I think somebody's microphone was accidentally on. Okay. The Newtonian spectrum is also featured in this work by Eliasson, in which the viewer is immersed in a spatial spectrum of color. Other artists who have created immersive works with color include James Turrell and Anne Veronica Janssens. In their works, it is not so much a question of looking at an art object, but as James Turrell has said about his installations, it is about, quote, looking at you looking to create an experience of wordless thought, unquote. The exhibition Color Chart, Reinventing Color 1950 to Today at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2008 brought attention to the fact that many artists have since the 1950s employed as basis of their artworks various ready-made selections and arrangements of color, such as house paint color charts. The goal for such an approach to color among artists was to free the selection and juxtaposition of colors from the notions of emotional and over-intellectual content of the art of the previous generations. The colors in his painting, Colors for a Large Wall from 1951, by Ellsworth Kelly, were the result of a random choice of paper samples left over from a previous artwork. Kelly's color paper experiments, his efforts to, quote, find out about color, unquote, anew, and to create something other than, quote, pictures on a wall, are forerunners of approaches and methods which have been used since by artists such as Jim Dine, Gerhard Richter, Damien Hirst, Helio Oiticica, Sol LeWitt, Jennifer Bartlett, Jan Dibbets, Donald Judd, Byron Kim, Sherry Levine, Liz Deschênes, Angela Bullock, and Corey Archangel, and many, many others. Here's one of Gerhard Richter's treatments of the same theme. Corey Archangel garners his colors from the internet and the depths of his colors computer management apps. You can see in the slide the title, which takes up about 3 lines of text. That is the title of this work, but it's also a kind of what do you call it in computer language? It's really a recipe for creating that work. And if you did create the work using that that protocol, it would be fine with Corey Archangel. He said that he doesn't regard these works so jealously, and he's appropriating stuff all the time from the internet. So he says that he can't really he can't really get angry if somebody else does that with his work. Interesting kind of attitude. So this is a very postmodern attitude to making art as well. For some people, for some artists. Zyla Jane is one of those artists who have created their own color coding system. In Jane's case, the system is based on the number 7, with the 7 days of the week and 7 colors of the Newtonian spectrum. And Jane says that the painting serves as a double function as a calendar. The color chart is often an instance of found color as well. and appropriation is another typically contemporary approach. Sherry Levine has produced a series of works in which she has appropriated the colors from famous modernist painters, in this case from Ad Reinhardt. The installation can be seen as a straightforward homage or as a tongue-in-cheek comment on the quintessential representative of abstraction. In Levine's case, it's both. So on the left, you see the original view of the original exhibition of Ad Reinhardt's blue paintings. And on the right is Sherry Levine's kind of appropriation and take on this exhibition and the works, both in the David Werner Gallery in New York. So in Ellsworth, Kelly had desired to make the choice and positioning of colors random, to form the composition without known or established aesthetic principles. The Italian artist Alighiero Boetti, or Alighiero e Boetti, as he sometimes called himself, went a step further by handing over both the choice of colors and the execution of his works to non-artists, often collaborating with Afghan artisan weavers. In this work, the goal was to include in it every possible color and shape, which is why it is called tutto, or everything. When the Austrian artist Franz West started making sculptures with papier-mâché, he couldn't decide what color he should paint them. They had to be painted to keep them intact. But he couldn't decide on the color, so he recruited some artist friends to paint them any color they saw fit. In this and other large-scale aluminium sculptures, though, West chose the colors himself. But he often chose colors which challenge conventional notions of the appearance of monumental outdoor sculpture. The randomness in the Australian artist Rebecca Bauman's automated color field is achieved with dozens of flip clock mechanisms, similar to an older generation airport flight information board, where colored cards turn over one by one in a seemingly random and rather hypnotic fashion. There's a couple of videos of this on YouTube. You could, if you feel like wanted to get acquainted with them, you can search for them in YouTube under Rebecca Bauman at Automated Color Field. The use of found color in the form of bric-a-brac and industrial waste, or flotsam and jetsam from beaches, is another defining characteristic of contemporary color. Color in this form can become a challenging or questioning of conventional aesthetics, or a political statement about society and the environment, or both, as in the works of Tony Cragg. Gabriel Orozco's works often address environmental issues. In this installation at the Guggenheim, Orozco presented washed up debris from the protected coastal biosphere of Baja California Sur in Mexico, and photographs of thousands of tiny items of trash left behind on the astroturf of a playing field near his home in Manhattan, arranging the objects and photographs by color. Byron Kim's ongoing project, Synecdoche, is another example of found color. The color patches reproduce skin colors which Kim has recorded from the forearms of friends and volunteers. There are many conceptual levels involving abstraction, representation, and the nature of humanity to this work. A synecdoche is a part which represents a whole, as in the phrase all hands on deck, or heads of state, or indeed an eye for color. Each patch here represents an individual, and together they can represent all of humanity. All the colors in David Batchelor's works are found colors. He finds particularly attractive the glowing and glitzy urban colors of illuminated signs, but has used everything from plastic bottles to electric cables and sunglasses in his works. The Brazilian artist Helio Oiticica's many-sided career is perhaps best described as a constant quest for freedom, both artistic and political. After Oiticica abandoned in the mid-1960s neo-concretism as an elitist art form, he switched to performances, participatory actions, and to what he called environmental anti-art. He became interested in dance and the samba culture, which resulted in creating the parangolés, multicolored soft sculptures of fabric and other materials which the audience of his performances were invited to wear and dance with. The German artist Franz Erhard Walter has similarly combined fabrics and color to create living sculptures through performance and participation. Kerry James Marshall depicts mostly black men, women, and children in his paintings, and using only black pigments and some browns, ochres, and blues. Perhaps their most striking feature is the blackness of the figures. Marshall told Wyatt Mason for the New York Times Styles magazine in 2016 that, quote, the idea of those paintings is that blackness is non-negotiable in those pictures. It's also unequivocal. They are black. That's the thing that I mean for people to identify immediately. They are black to demonstrate that blackness can have complexity, depth, richness, unquote. The Belgian conceptual artist Francis Alice works in painting, animation, video, and performance. Color matching from 2016, filmed in Mosul, Iraq on 31st of October 2016, consists of a single shot of Kurdish Peshmerga soldiers going about their maintenance duties in the middle of the desert. While in the foreground, we see the artist's hand holding a piece of white board on which he applies paints to match the colors of the scene. Finally, the colors are wiped off with a rag. Alice's works are sometimes political, but not in a declamatory way. In connection with another work which commented on the so-called green line separating the Israeli and Palestinian communities in Jerusalem, he said, quote, sometimes doing something poetic can become political, and sometimes doing something political can become poetic. I'm going to now show this video. It's about 5 minutes long by Francis Alice. If you don't hear any sound, don't worry. It's just background noise to to what the soldiers are doing. Okay. I mentioned that for contemporary artists, the modes of appearance of color were often as important or more important than the hue or nuance. There are many instances of contemporary art where the mode of appearance gives the work a unique and powerful chromatic and artistic content, as in Michel Stewart's Sayreville Strata Quartet, consisting only of earth from a quarry rubbed onto 4 large sheets of rag paper. This and the next work are examples of material-based color sourced directly from nature. Here is one of Wolfgang Leib's many pollen installations. And Anne Veronica Janssen's Anne Veronica Janssen's never colors her works. She does not apply color onto them. The color is given by the material. In this case, PVC glitter. Not from nature, obviously, but she quite often collaborates with industry and uses materials that are not really typical or usual for art, but for other professions. Anish Kapoor has explored the intersection of material and spiritual in all his works. Color is his main medium. Kapoor wants us to feel it in our guts and wants to bring us into contact with our bodily selves. In Kapoor's art, color, form, stuff, and sensation are one. Just as James Turrell's works are light and not about light, Kapoor's works are not colored, they are color. When Robert Smithson was seeking a suitable landscape for his seminal artwork, Spiral Jetty, color was one, if not the most important criterion for choosing the site. He visited several so-called salars or salt lakes, which exhibit vivid color because of their unique microbiological flora. When Spiral Jetty is discussed, though, it is usually its form and its conceptual references which are discussed. But here is what Smithson saw and experienced when he flew over the site to make a film of it. I quote, "Chemically speaking, our blood is analogous in composition to the primordial seas. Following the spiral steps, we return to our origins, back to the same pulpy protoplasm, a floating eye adrift in an antediluvian ocean. On the slopes of Rosal Point, I closed my eyes and the sun burned crimson through the lids. I opened them and the great salt lake was bleeding scarlet streaks. My sight was saturated by the color of red algae circulating in the heart of the lake, pumping into ruby currents. No, they were veins and arteries sucking up the obscure sediments. My eyes became combustion chambers, churning orbs of blood blazing by the light of the sun. All was enveloped in a flaming chromosphere." Unquote. Color was integral to all of the environmental works by Christo and Jean-Claude. And Judy Chicago's performances, called Atmospheres, from the late 1960s onwards. They involved colored smoke and fireworks in outdoor locations and were created, quote, "in an effort to feminize the atmosphere at a time when the Southern Californian art scene was almost entirely male-dominated." Rebecca Bauman's improvised smoke device, first realized in 2010, is a similar performative piece involving colored smoke. Bauman is interested in manifesting time and transitoriness in her art, and she sees color as a possibility to explore the psychology of collective experiences and our, quote, "pursuit of happiness" through celebration, and ritual. All five philosophers emphasized the embodied natural of all five philosophers in my thesis embodied the nature of the embodied nature of color, the fact that color bypasses levels of consciousness and is capable, in Lyotard's words, of short-circuiting doctrinal thinking. Maurice Merleau-Ponty emphasized our embeddedness in the flesh of the world through color. Quality, light, color, and depth in nature, quote, are there only because they awaken an echo in our bodies and because the body welcomes them, says Merleau-Ponty. His student and follower, Michel Dufresne, defends the role of sensuous or aesthetic knowledge as an alternative to the intellectual knowledge of logic. According to Dufresne, there is no theoretical replacement for the aesthetic evaluation of harmony and disharmony. And neither can they have precise and quantitative criteria. In his text on the Anglo-Irish painter Francis Bacon, Gilles Deleuze emphasized that the colors of art impact the retina and the body directly, without the mediation of narrative or representation. His view of paintings, colors, and materials is synesthetic. Writing about Deleuze's same book, the American artist, essayist, and Professor Megan Craig has said, painting, particularly Bacon's paintings, unleashes the force of color, a force capable of provoking a synesthetic sensation irreducible to any one of the five discernible senses or to any single sensibility. For Deleuze, quote ends there, for Deleuze, there cannot be any a priori or metaphysical structure of color relationships which could form the basis of a universal theory of color harmony and composition. Instead, colors arise from chaos, a sea of unknowable sensations, and the artist's task is to embrace this chaos. Attempts to avoid it will only lead to convention, opinion, and cliches. Jean-François Lyotard's view of postmodernism as, quote, the disruptive force that unsettles accepted rules for reception and meaning, unquote, becomes increasingly evident in the contemporary artist's use of color. Somewhat surprisingly, Lyotard identifies the sublime as a key element of the postmodern, and thereby the American abstract expressionist Barnett Newman as the quintessential postmodernist painter. Lyotard's reading of the sublime was interesting for my research. Color comes forward as a quintessentially ineffable, unrepresentable event or sensuous experience in Lyotard. For Lyotard, visual art and verbal discourse are examples of language games whose knowledge and experience can never be fully translated into each other. Lyotard's many texts on painters of his time explore these differences. These differences, the conflicts between what he called the figural and the discursive, are highlighted in passages that deal with color, especially in the books on Karel Appel and Sam Francis. The concrete gestures, the spots of paint, the traces of color on canvas, i.e., the matter, are opposed to words in Lyotard's texts. His answer to the problem was to attempt to match the figural gestures of painting with poetic and figural language. The philosopher Michel Henry called into question theories of color which excluded subjectivity of lived experience. In Henry's philosophy of life, which was greatly influenced by the art and writings of Wassily Kandinsky, self-affection, the feeling of life in oneself, is the key to all manifestation. As in Kandinsky's theories of art, so also in Henry's philosophy of life, our life world consists of exterior and interior, visible and invisible manifestation. The colors, lines, and forms of art are visible manifestations of invisible life, says Henri. In Seeing the Invisible, his book on the art of Wassily Kandinsky, Henri says, quote, "These fundamental tones of colors can only be discovered experientially, that is, through experience. Experience, not as an experience of the world, but as an invisible experience, resides in absolute subjectivity as a pathetic immediacy. This is what founds every possible theory of colors." Unquote. This, to me, is in stark contrast with what has been repeatedly said in literature about the fallibility and subjectivity of color perception and experience. It also runs counter to what most textbooks offer as an objective color theory. There can be no axioms or rules about artistic color that bypass embodiment and feeling. My doctoral research was motivated by a desire to call attention to color as a vital component and content of contemporary art. The study and analysis of the aesthetic effect and artistic impact of color in art and design is best achieved by opening one's eyes and the whole sensorium to the direct experience of color without the abstractions of first principles or a priori theory from outside of art itself. The prevailing climate in contemporary art discourse has not favored serious discussion of color. Over the years, multiple reasons to steer clear of color have been put forward. One perennial argument for the dismissal of color is that since colors are subjective experiences, nothing objective can be said about them. But as Michel Henry has argued, the very subjectivity of the experience of colors is the key to its connectedness with others and the world. According to Henry, colors are life's feeling of itself, as conveyed through the subjectivity of self-affection. Henri aligns himself with Kandinsky by saying that if there is a pictorial counterpoint, as Kandinsky had sought on the spiritual in art, it must be founded on spiritual resonance, and that such laws, quote, "are ultimately equivalent to the laws of life as direct expressions of its passion, creative violence, and exaltation." Henri's statement that color, quote, "coincides with our invisible life and is its pathos, its suffering, its boredom, its neglect, or its joy," is an anti-formalistic stance. It explains and validates contemporary artists' rejection of sterile formalism in favor of the presentation of life in all its inner and outer manifestations through color. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Harald. That was fantastic. I'm just overwhelmed, yes, with the beauty and depth of it. Do you want to stop share screen, and then I'll invite everybody to please turn your cameras on. We can wave hi and happy to take some questions.
I thought I stopped already.
Oh, okay. I see. I've just got everybody on speaker spotlight. There we go.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm wondering if anyone has any questions. You're free to just put your hand up and I'll invite you to unmute, or if you want to add something in the chat. Comment from Luann, very dynamic and impactful. Luann, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to share?
Well, most definitely. Thank you, Robin. Harold, that was absolutely really powerful. And I've been looking forward to it. I'm a huge fan of your work anyway, and I know you are also a painter. I think this is
Mm.
so important. So my question for you is this, I wrote down a lot of things from here, but the sensorium, the whole experience, direct experience, anti-formalist versus the sterile rules. So with that said, going forward, and we work together on the color literacy project. So as far as color literacy goes, seems like to me a direct argument for a new kind of literacy, color literacy, that embodies what these artists have been working for, and what what have been rejected in the last number of years, starting with Kandinsky in a way. But so that was my question. How do we what do you think is the art world, often because the lack of having taught or been exposed to a new way of thinking where we are now? What's
Yeah.
our opportunity to kind of like shift and say, oh no, we're not talking about just like making new rules. So that was my idea of like, how can you talk about like where we can go with this and how we can position this completely new way of, I think you're saying, of acknowledging our experience?
Yeah, that's a big question. And actually, I kind of left it open in my thesis. I didn't want to offer any kind of new theory about how to that would kind of include and embrace uh, contemporary arts approaches to color because it's an explosion. It's so diverse and so in what would be the word? I don't know. Inventive. And these artists are coming up with new ideas, new approaches, and new applications of color all the time that you just nobody's seen before. And I guess the internet has sort of accelerated this, and also, as I mentioned, cheap travel and so it's uh, and getting in touch with cultures of color that weren't known about before, weren't available before, perhaps. And I wouldn't like to see this formed into any kind of theory. I would like to just see it acknowledged, as you said. Somehow, maybe some kind of maps being made of it, charts, and see where it's going and so on. And I mean, I'm retired from teaching work, and I would really like to leave this to the next generations to figure out how to assimilate that into art education, how to assimilate that, because on the face of it, as I said, and I've said it in the thesis, that I felt utterly lost when I started on it. I thought this is impossible. I'm in the middle of a jungle that sort of extends that way, and it, forever. And what should I do? Because there's a new species coming in front of my eyes all the time, and I just can't categorize them into any kind of sort of existing taxonomy. So uh, somebody will have to, or maybe not any individual, but perhaps some kind of culture I would hope that would evolve with a completely new approach, an entirely new approach from what has been up to the 1960s, and being a kind of legacy of that sort of culture up to today. It's incredible how long that train is sort of flowing on. Something has to be done to get, I think, art education, color education, on a completely different track. And I think we're trying to do that in the color literacy project. That's exactly what we're trying to do. The focus must be shifted back on the actual experience of color, the actual artwork, the design work, what is happening in it, uh, visually, in terms of experiencing that, and not by a sort of long diatribe of theoretical whatnot, uh, abstractions, uh, but by actually, as Henri says, get in contact with with how you feel, about it, and then try to formulate some kind of maybe a structure around it. That's what Kandinsky tried to do.
It's so free, right? The work that you showed is just so inspiring and absolutely connecting to us on this whole
Mm.
visceral, nonverbal level. And yeah, just seeing examples of it is completely fantastic and mind blowing. Yeah. Paloma, you left some lovely comments. Do you have any questions or comments for Harald? Or do you want to just say hi?
I would like just to say hi because he knows I'm very fond of his work and his approach on color that has no rules and give priority to the artist's creation. We love science, but even science is not based on rules, right?
Yeah.
It evolves in time. We have different views in different cultures, and I believe we're going ahead on that. We're more open to different views of the world, different understandings of what is the world, what is life, and we're getting to get a global culture more integrated, more open, right?
Mm.
Congrats.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned science there because I mean, uh, you might think that I'm anti-science or anti-theory. No, certainly not. Theory is a great tool, but you can't kind of hang yourself on a theory that doesn't work anymore, uh, which has happened in in color education to a large extent. And the trouble with the with the that I found in my study with the relationship of science and color science and and um, and the literature, the, the artistic uh, literature on color, as I call it, the books for artists, the books that are meant to provide guidelines on color for artists. That the trouble with that relationship is that when the books, now I'm talking about the ones that I went through, about 20, 30 books, and 20 ended up in my thesis. Um, they misquote science. They use outdated, defunct science, and they use irrelevant science that has nothing scientific ideas about I don't know what color vision or optics or physics or whatever, which provide absolutely no insight into what how it could have any relevance for art. At least the authors don't. So that's the problem. It's not science. It's the way it's misappropriated. Science
Just
could be
different
very
ways of
useful.
knowing and
Yeah, yeah.
and being able to deal with those. Udo, you need to unmute.
Sorry. First of all, what I see on the screen is betraying my inner reference of how a 71-year-old man should look like. So the occupation with color seems to keep you young.
Yes, it does.
But but here's my question. I'm an artist and a graphic designer, and in the commercial art, we always explore new color combinations because colors, when you see them too often in certain combinations, let's say for corporate identities, etc., seems to wear out and lose effect. Uh, an example is, for example, the since the World Cup in soccer is soon upon us, the team in Miami has a pale pink shirt as their color.
Yeah.
That was unthinkable 10, 20 years ago. but now you can wear it. There is even a law, I believe, that you cannot paint the locker room, the change room of the opponent team in a purple or rose color because it is supposed to weaken a team spirit. So, so things are changing constantly. The how colors are perceived, what is ugly before can be in fashion now, and so that goes, I think, with also what you reference that the actually occupation with color and the study of color and the how colors actually work on somebody is more important than what is written in the literature. And because it's often just copied over from previous literature and not really experienced. So I just want to hear from you about the change of color and the aging of color.
Well, yes, of course, it's very time dependent and also geographically, culturally dependent. Um, yeah, I noted the pink color on the Miami team, and now you see it everywhere. I mean, I've seen so many teams with these pink shirts,
Exactly.
and yeah, and maybe somewhere in the Far East or somewhere I don't know, nobody would have blinked an eye at the pink color at first or whatever. And we have many examples of how attitudes to certain hues or nuances of color have changed entirely through the centuries, or even I don't know, maybe from one town to another over a very short geographical distance or a very short period of time, as in the case of the pink shirt. So you're absolutely right. It's really context dependent, isn't it? And it's also dependent on the form that is attached to and the story or the narrative
Mhm.
that goes with it. You would know
Right.
that as a graphic designer, uh, putting that pink color on a certain book cover or whatever would be a no-no for somebody, and for some other person it would be the best choice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's something that I think I think these philosophers also emphasize much that there's no absolute. There are no absolutes about color. Uh, that I think especially Deleuze would emphasize that he didn't like any kind of absolute or uh, identity. He was very much against identity.
Mhm.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Harold. Any more questions or comments? It's such an excellent and inspiring talk, so beautifully put together. And I just, yeah, I think that, we should definitely spread the word, and I'll let you know when the recording is ready because this, is so inspiring on so many different levels. So once again, thank you so much. And
Thank you
uh,
for thank you for inviting me. Can I advertise this thesis?
absolutely. And here's another pink, but a good
Yeah.
title cover and side. Show the side of the BF. Fantastic. Love it.
Uh, and if you find it too heavy, too big, it's 511 pages. You can get it as a PDF for nothing, for free, from the university research. What do you call it? Uh, mm, Depository. So did you if you is this recorded? I mean,
Yeah.
I put the address where you can find it on the final slide. So
Yeah. And we can add that up on our website too.
yeah, yeah.
So that would be great. Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. And our next CRC event is coming up in May. It's a workshop on the brand of you. So how to use color in your life for your branding. And we're very much looking forward to that. So please have a look at our website, colorresearch.org, and sign up. Love to see you there. Okay, bye-bye, everyone, and thank you again, Harold. Have a good day, have a good evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.